Chapter 250. On the 18th of November, the famous Battle of South Shore, officially known as the Battle of Hillsbrad Hills, broke out. Unlike the previous battles between humans and orcs, where they lost in the field and were forced to defend passively in every large-scale defensive battle, this time, they successfully lured the enemy into the trap and entered the carefully selected battlefield of South Shore. Every Alliance general was extraordinarily excited. The intelligence had come back. The Horde army had assembled on the ships, and according to the direction, their destination was South Shore. There was no way to lie about this. Duke's Naga could not possibly guard the coastline of hundreds of kilometers of wetlands without any loopholes. This was something that could not be guarded by any means in this era. The march of the army was different. When a large number of ships were pushed from the beach into the sea, the Alliance generals knew that the war was coming. One day later the orcs would come. Duke pressed his palm on the huge map in the command center and said loudly, "This time, the name of the battle is Orc Blood." Orc Blood? A simple and straightforward name. The proud soldiers and generals from the Seven Kingdoms all fell into a murmur as if they were possessed. Soon, an indescribable feeling of fear spread through their bodies and went straight to the deepest part of their minds. It shook violently, resonating with the armor on their bodies and the long swords in the scabbards at their waists. These experienced generals had a strange feeling at the same time. It was as if a magnificent illusion had appeared in front of their eyes. On the battlefield that had been burned to ashes, countless green-skinned corpses were strewn all over the place. Every corpse was so ferocious and cruel, but their unwilling souls could only continue to vent their anger by roaring in the desperate hell. The generals could not think of any other name more suitable for this battle after hearing the name, Orc Blood, from Duke's mouth. Even if this was not the final battle between the Alliance and the Horde, it was still very exciting to let the enemy's blood dry. No. They even felt that because of the name, the success of the battle was inevitable. Of course, this was just a momentary illusion. Not to mention the Stormwind Kingdom's army that had experienced the defense battle of Stormwind City, just by seeing with their own eyes that even the corpses of the orc laborers had the physiques of the strongest human soldiers, the generals of the Alliance knew that the road ahead would be extremely difficult. There was no such thing as a casual victory. Every victory, even with such an overwhelming advantage, had to go through several life-and-death ordeals. The expressions on their faces quickly changed from excitement to seriousness. However, it was undeniable that as useless martial artists in a peaceful era, hearing such a name for battle in a chaotic world that suddenly descended upon them would inevitably stir up the lofty sentiments lurking in their bodies. Their sharp eyes were still filled with excitement. What excited them the most was to take the first step towards strategic victory before they gained an advantage in terms of tactics. This was the great achievement of a super genius deputy commander who looked like he was 19 years old but was actually only 15 years old. In a sense, they were standing on the shoulders of giants. "Please let me, Hasa's Eagle Knights, be the vanguard." "Stop joking. This is a defensive battle. Don't tell me your knights are going to charge into the sea. Let my torrential Fort Mountain infantry do it." Every general enthusiastically recommended themselves to Duke. Originally, the deployment of the army should have been done by Lothar, the commander-in-chief. Lothar, on the other hand, said that no one knew the South Shore defense line better than Duke himself, so it was best for him to arrange it. So he temporarily handed over the command of the army to Duke. Duke was not going to pass on this responsibility. He was very clear that this was likely to be the turning point between the Alliance and the Horde. Every army that appeared might go down in history because of this. However, Duke was extremely cautious. As a transmigrator, he knew that the Horde must have some cards. Even though the Horde had changed a lot, the few cards in the history were probably still there. First, General Proudmoore. Duke directly called out his rank. Yes. It was rare for King Dalen Proudmoore to stand at attention. Except for the 4th Fleet, which is cruising in the waters opposite the West Beach, all fleets set up pocket formations in the waters opposite South Shore. All light transport ships are to be sent over. Before we receive the signal, we must let go of 60% of the large transport ships with metal plates. Once we receive the signal, kill them at all cost. No problem. General Dalen was heroic. Duke turned his head and scanned the Alliance generals from left to right. Finally, his gaze landed on Mograine and Abendis. "General Mograine, General Abendis, can I trust your Scarlet Crusade?" "The Scarlet Crusade will not retreat," Mograine roared domineeringly. On this obviously much younger face, Duke seemed to see the heroic image of him wielding the domineering semi-divine weapon, Ashbringer, to kill enemies in the future. Duke drew a line on the map. From the mountain to the west of South Shore, 5 kilometers to the west belongs to your army. I want you to defend the mountain to the death. Without the signal, no counterattack. Understood. In this era, army was a very general concept. A smaller army could only have 5 or 6,000 people. A bigger army, like Mograine's Scarlet Crusade, had nearly 30,000 people. The current Scarlet Crusade was far less crazy and twisted than in the future. They had excellent discipline and high morale. They were definitely the cream of the Lordaeron army. Duque sent them as the main defense force. King Terinas, who had been silent all this time, also had a proud expression on his face. Next, Duque looked at King Lang. General Rin. Duque was definitely strange, but in order to maintain the military system of the alliance, he had to do this. Yes. The golden-armored Lang was also eager to prove himself. You and General Seamus will lead the Griffin Legion and the 1st and 2nd Stormwind Infantry Divisions to defend the mountain to the east of the town. Understood. To be honest, Lang was a little disappointed. It sounded like Mograine, but one on the left and one on the right of South Shore. In reality, the Stormwind had the advantage in terms of terrain. There was also a relatively rapid river to the east of South Shore. If they attacked from the mountain, it would be no different than having an extra moat. Lang also knew that Duque wanted him to attack, but also to preserve the strength of the Stormwind. Considering the overall situation, this was the safest arrangement. Lang did not say anything. General Lothar, lead all the cavalry and prepare to charge along the designated route. When the time comes, all the enemies that enter the town will be thrown into the sea to feed the fish. No problem. Lothar was also very excited. Chapter 251. The sun was setting. A bright sword was inserted into the hilltop. In the field of vision. The tip of the sword was stabbed into the slightly yellowed meadow. The sharp blade, which shone like a pool of autumn water, reflected the vast sea, while the hilt of the sword blended into the endless sky. It was as if the sword had pierced through the entire world. The blue ribbon on the hilt with the emblem of a lion's head fluttered in the breeze, and the swaying elegance reminded one of a distant memory. The wise and deep blue eyes were squinting slightly, greedily absorbing the scenery between heaven and earth into his pupils. The middle-aged man was wearing a blue lion's head cloak with golden edges. Under the cloak was a shiny golden helmet, which symbolized the glory of an era as well as the shame of an era. A pair of large hands that had only recently become rough touched the top of the sword hilt, holding the sharp sword. He stood upright in the wind like a stone statue. Your Majesty, it's getting late. Endoin, guess what I'm looking at? King Lang smiled and turned around to ask his childhood friend, the former leader of the Storm Knights, and the current commander-in-chief of the Alliance. After crossing the sea, head forward, then southwest, then southeast, where Stormwind City is. Lothar was indeed worthy of being Lang's best friend. He easily guessed Lang's thoughts. Stormwind City is the land that we once risked our lives to protect. It's also our glory. When I knew that Stormwind City could not be defended, I thought that my sword and I would be destroyed there. However, for the sake of Varian, I'm still standing here looking at my sword in a foreign land. Lang pulled the sword out of the ground. The sharp and tough blade did not show the slightest bit of damage even though it had been through such rough treatment. Lang raised the tip of the sword to the sky and stared at it quietly. A timid voice came from behind Lang and Lothar. Father, are you saying that I've tarnished your glory? No, it's not like that, Varian. True glory is never a person or a person's private property. Lang retracted his gaze. The storm golden sword that symbolized royal power and glory looked extremely slender and sturdy in the setting sun. It was as if the sword was supporting a part of the world. Lang sheathed the sword and walked over to his lover and child. The queen gave Varian a gentle push, allowing the young Varian to step forward. Lang caressed Varian's head lovingly. His loving gaze seemed to have traveled through time. 1,000 years ago, when the last son of Thoradin the Great was abandoned in the ruins of the Torrent Castle by the arrogant nobles who were eager to go to the rich land of Lordaeron. The late king of Stormwind brought his son and led the abandoned poor people across half of the continent to the valley where Stormwind City is now. The late king made a vow. I swear to protect my people, to keep them away from hunger and cold, to keep them away from killing and strife, and to keep them away from the arrogance and greed of the nobles. Lang's voice was deep, but there was a strange sense of emptiness that made everyone feel as if they had traveled through time with his voice. The late king did it. He forged the glory of Stormwind in his own way. He also used his own way to tell the later generations what glory was. Before he died, he also issued an imperial order for every noble in the new kingdom to follow the spirit of chivalry, to be humble and devout, full of glory, not afraid of sacrifice, brave and resolute, compassionate and honest. That was how Stormwind came to be founded, with military might and the tradition of inheriting titles through military merit. It's a pity that most of the nobles in Stormwind have forgotten all of this. Hence, I'm more willing to see the fall of Stormwind City as a punishment from our ancestors for losing our glory. The young William nodded as if he understood. Fortunately, when the people of Stormwind were at their most desperate, I still had your Uncle Anduin and the unparalleled genius Duque to help me. This gave me the opportunity to make up for my mistake and recover the lost glory of the kingdom. My personal glory is no longer important. My only hope is that the descendants of Orion will not forget their original intention and pass on the glory of the late king. As long as I can do it, I won't have any regrets even if I die. Father. You will. You will see the day when Stormwind City is restored, William said with absolute certainty. I hope so too. However, your Uncle Duque and I will eventually grow old. When that time comes, it will depend on your and Brother Duque's hard work. Yes. The young prince nodded vigorously. Looking at the sea, Lang's vision seemed to penetrate the horizon and reach the huge transport fleet that was traveling at high speed on the sea. It all depends on tomorrow. Don't worry, there's you, there's me, there's Duque. Whether it's Stormwind City or the Alliance, we are invincible. No one would have thought that just a day ago at the wetland, at the gathering of hundreds of thousands of orcs, someone would say something that was almost the same. Orgrim Doomhammer stood on a high hill. In his vision, hundreds of thousands of orcs stepped on the muddy ground. There were so many beastmen that it looked like a bright green ocean as far as the eye could see. This ocean breathed together, enjoyed the victory together, and enjoyed the same fate. Every orc was looking forward to Orgrim's speech. In the eyes of the orcs, even though there was still the last iron furnace fort that had not been conquered, everyone believed that it was only a matter of time before Kilrog Deadeye's Bloodring clan dragged those damned dwarves out of the cave and killed them. They had completely conquered this continent. Although there was better prey and more fertile land here than in their homeland, it was still far from enough to accommodate all the clans. In the eyes of the orcs, this was only enough for 3 large clans to thrive. But how could there only be 3 large clans? Orgrim laughed. Then he raised his famous Doomhammer up high and roared towards the sky. My people, listen to me. The commotion below disappeared. Every orc quietened down and turned their ugly faces full of protruding fangs towards Orgrim. This world is very suitable for survival. We can rebuild our homeland here. And we have already conquered this land. This is the victory of the Horde. This is the victory of the orcs. Suddenly, a burst of earth-shattering cheers erupted from below. Orgrim could only wait for the cheers to die down before he continued. But this is not enough. Humans are not as weak as we thought. They are very good at learning and have many tricks up their sleeves. Every time they lose, they will become stronger to deal with our axes and hammers. Even though we have chased them out of this continent, they are still trying very hard to take back what once belonged to them. So what we need to do is to destroy them. To wipe them out from this world. Orgrim raised his warhammer and pointed it towards the north. Orcs, north, attack. Chapter 252. Orgrim's speech was simple and violent. Needless to say, there would naturally be people who would describe the richness of the continent in the north. All he needed to do was tell his tribesmen where the enemy was, and his tribesmen, who had become extremely violent after drinking the demon's blood, would swarm towards them. Unlike most beastmen, Orgrim was extremely calm and clear-headed. Not only did he carefully study the map and confirm the situation in the nearby seas, he had also started to learn the human common language after leaving Stormwind City. Orgrim purposely kept a family of captives and used their relatives as a hostage to force an old woman to teach him the common language. From pointing to the simplest items such as a rock, Orgrim compared the pronunciation and verified his translation results one by one. This was very boring and not understood by most beastmen. However, in this crossing of the sea, Orgrim produced the corresponding results. He had seen the route of the transport fleet on a captured military map. He was very clear about the power of the huge human warships on the sea. The rumbling of the cannons could easily send more than 10 beastmen flying at the same time. The beastmen did not have the slightest ability to fight back on the sea. Therefore, Orgrim's chosen route was to start from Paladin Bay on the other side of the wetlands and head northeast to reach the shallow waters with quite a lot of underwater reefs. Then he would follow the sea between Rapids Fort and Tangarock and head north all the way to the eastern beach next to South Shore. This way he could allow the main force to avoid the most powerful human fleet on the sea. Orgrim considered the Murlocs and Nagas who worked for the humans, but he felt that there were too few of them to be a threat to the Horde. He did not intend to allow the main force to land on the eastern beach because the mountains there were more steep and the entire beach was covered by the humans' arrows and ballistae. If they landed there, even a victory would be a Pyrrhic one. The western coast of South Shore was different. There were more rocks on the coast, which was convenient for concealment and cover. There were too few people with brains in the horde. Orgrim could only personally calculate the time of departure and arrival. His calculations were very accurate. If there were no accidents along the way, then the first batch of transport ships would arrive late at night. After the decoy fleet, the main force would land around 4:30 in the morning. As long as the main force could successfully land. When the main force of the horde reached South Shore, it would just be morning. The warriors of the tribe would have a whole day to deal with the humans. Orgrim believed that with the beastmen's unparalleled stamina and endurance, even if the weaker humans could defend themselves for a while, they would be worn down and destroyed after a few hours. Orgrim firmly believed that. In fact, on the Alliance's side, General Dalen, who had already led his fleet out to sea, slammed the table and cursed when he heard the time it would take for the horde to pass the sniper position. Doesn't this make our entire fleet into mascots at sea? Dai Lin felt irritated as he looked at the dark sea through the monocular. The orc leader is obviously not a brute who only knows how to charge. You've met your match, Dalen. It was a beautiful lady with long blonde hair and long pointy ears. She stood beside Dai Lin. This was a position that was closer to Dai Lin than the guards of the royal family. All of these indicated that this elven mage had a special status. Indeed, this high elf mage's name was Gina Goldsword, and she was King Delen's lover. This was an almost open secret. Is there any news? Yes, your favorite little Duque sent a message. He said that the plan remains the same. Dai Lin suddenly calmed down. He was very sure that Duque had a special way to change the situation. In this era, unless the ships were less than 100 meters apart, there was no such thing as a night battle. Since Duque told him that the plan remained the same, he would wait for that opportunity. It was late at night, and the moon was shrouded in dark clouds. Looking out over the dark sea was a very boring task. Many new lookouts would fall asleep in such a situation. But no one could sleep tonight. All the Marines were told that they would be engaged in an unprecedented night battle. This determined that the powerful Kur Dyla's fleet would either gain nothing from this battle and be left to the side, or they would be promoted to become hunters of the night. The huge fleet was arranged in a straight line parallel to the distant coastline. This was the best choice for maximizing the fleet's firepower against an opponent who could not fight back. The helmsman stared at the stern lights of friendly ships not far ahead, carefully maintaining a distance and formation. In the distant darkness, the first reflection appeared. This quickly attracted the attention of the lookout and Admiral Dai Lin. Then, more blurry light spots appeared in the darkness. Like slowly rising fireworks, milky white light balls floated high into the sky. In just a few seconds, the surface of the sea lit up even more brightly, illuminating a large part of the coastal area near the coast as if it was daytime. Light spell? Why is it there? Dai Lin was not a mage, so he was not too sure. The high elf mage Gina laughed. If a human or high elf mage apprentice made such a substandard spell, he would definitely be severely punished by his mentor. But for a murloc this is already very good. Murloc? It's actually a murloc mage? As someone who had spent a long time at sea and dealt with murlocs, nagas and various sea monsters for half his life, Dai Lin certainly knew that there was a branch of murloc wise men among the murlocs. However, those ridiculous murloc wise men were the worst spellcasters. The ice arrows they shot could only form ice that was less than a finger's width in an area the size of a palm. They would scatter with a single slap. Unless they hit a vital point, there was no lethality to speak of. Dai Lin never thought that these murloc wise men who could only cast level 1 spells at most, could be used in this way. Yes, they were weak scum. But after playing the role of a lighthouse, they were god-level teammates. In the binoculars, he saw that the orc transport ships in the area covered by the light were the target ships covered by iron sheets. Dai Lin shouted excitedly, "Open all cannons! Open fire! Open fire!" 2 minutes later, the Kuel Dyla's fleet, which was already ready, let out a series of roars. Bang, 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 bang. The so-called salvo was just an extremely short interval between all the cannons from the bow to the stern. If they fired at the same time, the terrifying recoil would destroy the entire deck and even the entire battleship. Even if the cannonballs did not arrive at the same time, the momentum was already very terrifying. A heavy rain of iron bullets streaked across the pitch-black sky and fell into the Horde's transport fleet with a unique screech that symbolized the arrival of the Grim Reaper. Chapter 253. In this era, the accuracy of a fleet's cannons was metaphysical. Not to mention that it was a night battle. These early breech-loading cannons were crude and had no way to improve the stability of the cannons. Yes, there was no rifling, no crosshairs, not even a stable firing base. Every shot would be affected by the recoil from the next shot, causing the ship to tilt. There were no recoil mechanisms or recoil mechanisms. After a shot, the wheels under the cannon retreated to reduce the recoil. Then the cannons would be pushed back to their original positions. Even the best cannoneers had a worrisome hit rate. Not to mention the orcs' strange transport ships. They had no sails or decks. They were just a big turtle shell. This gave Dai Lin a headache. Hinge shells that could destroy the ship's masts and grapeshot shells that could kill the ship's crew could not be used. They could only rely on the most primitive cannons to shoot big iron balls to see if they could hit the enemy's vital parts and cause fatal damage. Dai Lin saw through his binoculars that a few cannons hit the enemy ships, but nothing happened. They either bounced off the ship's thick iron sheet or got stuck on the ship's roof. The orc laborers still rowed the oars with all their might, driving the ship quickly. Damn it. At this rate, I won't even be able to save 10%, let alone 60%. The cannons were fierce and the water pillars were high. However, only a few orc transport ships were sunk. Admiral Dai Lin's balls hurt. At this time the Nagas made their move. Many male Nagas jumped onto the water despite the fierce cannons. They brandished their huge tridents and fiercely hacked at the exposed oars. Often, after a single leap, more than 10 oars were cut off with a series of clattering sounds. The orc laborers in charge of rowing the ships did not know what was happening. They could see that the ships were already spinning, and the laborers were still rowing the oars so that the broken oars were slicing through the air. Good. Good job. Admiral Dai Lin waved his arms excitedly. Send out the signal. Have the Third Fleet spread out and attack them at close range. The High Elf Mage frowned. Be careful of their counterattack. What are you afraid of? How could a transport ship with such a low railing and no turrets be able to launch a melee battle against our ship? Why should I be afraid of a transport ship that doesn't even have a ram? Dai Lin waved his hands nonchalantly. Thus the Third Fleet approached. As the distance closed, the power and accuracy of the bombardment increased exponentially. The iron ball cannonball launched by the powerful momentum collided violently with the orc transport ship. The iron cannonball shattered under the tremendous impact, and so did the transport ship. At this time, the moon suddenly emerged from the clouds. Under the bright moonlight, one could clearly see the metal pieces and wood shavings flying in the air from the explosion. The dazzling light produced by the explosion announced the arrival of death. The cannonballs aimed at the ship's waterline were the most dangerous and brutal. Even if it didn't hit the target directly, a misfire near the ship's waterline would very likely cause the hull of the orc's inferior transport ship to crack. One after another, the huge metal transport ships began to sink. From the clamor that reached the sky, one could tell that every metal transport ship was filled with orc warriors. Perhaps on land, these warriors were omnipotent warriors who could charge forward bravely even after taking a dozen arrows. But in the sea they were nothing. They were no different from weak babies. When the hull tilted, most of the entrances and exits could not be opened. The deck was originally covered with iron to increase the ship's defensive capabilities. This greatly increased the survivability of the people inside when the ship was not sinking. However, when the ship sank, it became a huge coffin. He led nearly 1,000 orc warriors and slowly sank to the bottom of the shallow sea. You want to play naval warfare with our Kultiras? You bunch of green-skinned creatures are not qualified. Dai Lin laughed heartily. He even pulled Gina Goldsword over and gave her a kiss. In his field of vision, at least a dozen giant iron orc transport ships began to sink. More than 30 transport ships had lost their motor power because their oars had been broken, and were floating or spinning on the surface of the sea. I've reported the situation to the Deputy Commander. The Deputy Commander has urgently informed Your Majesty that your fleet needs to retreat. Beware of the Horde's desperate attacks. Beware of what? Beware of these transport ships with low sides, no towers, no ram and no long-range weapons? Isn't he underestimating our Kultira's fleet? Dai Lin suddenly thought of something. He wants his storm fleet to get some military merits too, right? I'll let them do it later. At this moment, it was as if the heavens wanted to slap him in the face. Dai Lin had successfully demonstrated what it meant by extreme joy turning to sorrow. Thousands of small and medium-sized transport ships suddenly rushed out where there was no light from flash. The biggest difference between these ships and the previous transport ships was that the bow of these ships was equipped with the sharp horn of some kind of huge creature. It was not a standard ram, but it was not much different if it was used for one-time use. General Dai Lin's face instantly turned pale. Retreat. Let the Third Fleet retreat. Dai Lin ordered in a panic. But it was too late. Even though the moonlight was good, when they discovered the swarm of small ships, Kul Tira's fleet could not do anything. Compared to the light boats that used oars, the sails of Kul Tira's were too slow in both turning and in speed. The result of their clumsiness was that the ships at the front were all surrounded by the Horde's small ships. The Horde's small transport ships crashed into Kul Tira's fleet. Then a scene that left the people of Kul Tira's dumbfounded happened. The roofs of the transport ships were lifted off. They were not opened like loose leaf, but like a piece of cloth covering them. A bunch of orcs used brute force to flip the roofs that weighed who knew how many tons into the water. Then, without even using grappling hooks, they climbed up the ship's outer wall and onto the deck. Of course, their climbing was resisted by the sailors. Most of the orcs were blasted into the sea before they could climb up. Those that did not know how to swim would often drown. However, as more and more orc transport ships participated in the siege, General Dai Lin, who was a few hundred meters away, watched in shock as the warships of the Third Fleet were attacked one after another. Usually, a warship would be attacked by more than 10 small orc boats. When more than 10 bright green figures appeared on the deck, Dai Lin knew that the ship was finished. Retreat. Retreat quickly. Dai Lin closed his eyes. After painfully abandoning the Third Fleet that was mired in a chaotic battle, Dai Lin led the remaining ships and seriously depleted the tribe's forces with a mid-range bombardment that was very artistic and had a sense of distance. The Horde's fleet had achieved their goal. Under the heavy bombardment, they continued to sail towards South Shore. Chapter 254. South Shore was a small port town. Its size could not compare to any other port on the continent. Needless to say, Booty Bay or the deep-water harbors of the future, such as Storm Port and Menethil Port. However, with Duque's help, it became the busiest port in the entire northern continent after the refugees arrived at Stormwind City. At first, there was only a small wooden pier, but now there was a huge stone pier. It was no longer a place for civilian fishing boats, but a port for both commercial and military purposes. South Shore went from dark at night to a place where it was unsuitable to go out to sea unless there was a storm. Every day, from dawn until the moon rose above the sea, there was no rest. Merchants shipped goods from various ports, not just from the northern continent. Under the temptation of money, the goblins of Booty Bay risked their lives to deliver the goods that Duke ordered from them. Tens of thousands of people worked day in and day out, not to accumulate wealth for this port, but for the survival of the hundreds of thousands of refugees as well as for the upcoming battle. Late at night, there was still an hour before the first rays of dawn appeared. The sea on the other side of South Shore was calm and tranquil, and there were only sparkling waves on the pitch-black surface of the sea. If the officers had not started the pre-battle mobilization, if the soldiers had not gone to bed early, been woken up early, put on their armor, and waited in the bunkers and trenches on the mountain, everyone would have thought that the battle that was about to happen was just an illusion that would never come. South Shore's command center was brightly lit. Most of the kings were not used to waking up in the middle of the night. For the older kings, Zeon, Tarinas, and Eden, the impact was even more obvious. Most of them served refreshment drinks at hand. Duque sat on the seat that originally belonged to Lothar. He was the commander of this battle. Duque gently held his chin with his left hand, and spat out 2 words through gritted teeth: "Ring the bell." Windsor was a very responsible soldier, and he would not miss Duque's order. He waved his hand and shouted, "The enemy is here. Enter the first phase." The clear and sharp bell rang next to the command center. Soon, the bell rang quickly and more bell rings echoed around the entire South Shore like echoes. The 2 hills on the east and west sides of South Shore were in an uproar. It was as if the hills were the legendary guardians of the shadow elves, the mountain giants. The faint shouts of officers could be heard in the wind. They seemed to be scolding the soldiers who dared to doze off. Flare. Duque was a man of few words. The order was quickly passed down, and soon, a cannon sounded from the eastern hill of South Shore. A dazzling red ball of light was shot into the air. It was only then that the leaders of the Alliance who were holding binoculars saw that countless small black shadows had appeared on the surface of the dark sea in the distance. It was much smaller than the warships they were used to seeing at the South Shore port. Compared to them, these small transport ships were like a bunch of leaves scattered on the water. However, These shadows that resembled leaves rapidly grew larger in everyone's field of vision. In just a moment, the shape of a ship appeared in their field of vision. The mages on the two sides of the hills released a large number of illumination spells. Countless white balls of light began to rise tens of meters above the beach, illuminating the entire beach as if it was daytime. The Horde's transport ships came. They did not slow down at all and crashed straight into the rocky eastern coast. Even though they were thousands of meters away, the kings in the command center could see a terrifying tremor from the hull of the ship. In their trance, they could even feel the wooden bottom of the boat wailing, and the big iron nails on the deck struggling, making a sound that made their teeth ache as they escaped from the wood. Countless black shadows emerged from the ship. With the help of the light, the human guards on the shore quickly saw their enemies, the orc laborers. They did not wear armor and held the crudest mallets or primitive stone axes. Under the shouts of the few orc warriors, they somewhat foolishly charged towards the hills not far from the shore. First archer team, fire at will. Second archer team, get ready. It was not worth it to use up the physical strength of the archers to deal with the enemy's cannon fodder. However, High Lord Mograine of Rotterdam knew that the main characters today would not be the archers of Rotterdam. And according to the unparalleled deputy commander, after the archers used up their physical strength, there would be at least 3 hours for them to rest and recover. Just as Mograine glanced at the special seat, on the top of the hill, the sound of bowstrings vibrating could be heard. The arrows were very accurate. Even if they could not hit the enemy's vital points, they would basically hit the enemy's body. Not bad. Servanas, who was bored to death in the special seats, commented. Then not bad. That Queen Sylvanas mentioned was almost at the level of a sharpshooter in the human world. The shooting skills of the archers of the Rotterdam Kingdom were all accumulated through countless times of shooting practice. They had started training at the age of 18, and most of these archers had more than 5 years of training. The arrows that each of them had used up would probably be worth hundreds of Arather gold coins. After coming here, Mograine had been depressed for a long time when he found out that the arrows of ordinary archers were useless against the orc warriors. The more lethal javelins were the way to go. Luckily, Duque had informed him that the archers could still be used on the enemy's cannon fodder. Regardless of whether this was recycling, at least the gold coins were used on the orc laborers. After a dozen breaths, the beach regained its peace. The laborers, who only had loud voices, were quickly shot by many arrows and died on the shore. More and more transport ships came ashore. The archers started to get busy. Their arms were sore from shooting continuously. Finally, the first batch of laborers started to fight their way to the front of the hill. General Abendis shouted, "Raise your spears, raise your shields, attack." In front of the bunker at the bottom of the hill, the soldiers were already ready. They formed a long line of defense. Perhaps this was not enough to defend against the huge number of orc warriors. However, if it was used to deal with the laborers, it would be more than enough to let the new soldiers see some blood. Now they waited and formed a sturdy shield wall with spears sticking out. There was no strategy to speak of. The scattered orc laborers who were attacking fiercely crashed into the shield wall. The shield wall was not damaged at all. Every laborer was stabbed to death. Chapter 255. The battle with the laborers was easy. Apart from the real blood, it was no different from using spears to stab scarecrows in training. Some soldiers were already teasing, "If the so-called warriors of the Horde are all like this, our team can kill 10,000 of them." Just then, after the second round of illumination, Abendis discovered that a huge transport ship had begun to rush ashore, and many taller figures with obvious armor appeared on the shore. The main force of the orcs was coming. Mograine ordered, "Blow the horn. Archers cover. Let the soldiers with swords and shields and spears come back. We're about to enter the second phase." The unique horn of the Rotterdam army sounded, and the soldiers who were having fun killing at the front line suddenly realized that it was time to retreat. Under the good light and the commander's orders, the soldiers retreated in an orderly manner. They followed the predetermined mountain path to the second line of defense that was higher above sea level. When he saw his soldiers retreating according to plan, General Abendis raised his sword and shouted, "First Javelin Brigade, shoot!" The long shadow immediately shot into the air, drawing a beautiful arc in the air. Then it let out a sharp whistle and pierced downwards. Without any accidents, a considerable number of orc warriors were nailed to death at the bottom of the hill. However, many continued to charge. Abendis noticed that many orc warriors were better armed than what the intelligence had said. They were no longer the naked men described by the soldiers of Storm City, who only had brute strength. Their right shoulders, which held weapons, were covered with huge spiked pauldrons. Their heads were covered with horned helmets, and their chests were covered with a half-body armor that glowed with a metallic luster. Both of their forearms were covered with leather armors. They did not have armor on their lower bodies, only a belt that looked like a leather skirt. However, they were obviously wearing a pair of huge boots, which allowed them to pass through the complicated terrain of the battlefield better. Abendis quickly summoned a Dalajan mage who was in charge of communication, and summarized the information to Duque. After receiving the news, there was silence in the command center. Noxus pursed his lips. "Gentlemen, at least we have confirmed that our enemies are a group of intelligent creatures that can evolve." No one laughed at this lame joke. It was not funny at all. Duque glanced at the exquisite wall clock hanging in the command center. It was 4:30 in the morning. "Tell Aurelia and Cervantes that it's their ranger's turn." Before Duque could finish his sentence, two voices echoed throughout the command center. "I heard you." It was the voice of Great Demon Queen Aurelia. "I'm going to go moldy, Queen," she complained. Then the earth-shattering noise on the beach seemed to quiet down a lot. Whether it was Lang and Seamus on the eastern hill or Mograine and Abendis on the western hill, none of the commanders dared to believe their eyes. It had been too long since the humans had seen the elite High Elves Rangers. If the definition of a godly archer was to be able to kill one enemy with one arrow, then these Rangers were super godly archers. They were simply monster-level existences. They could only hear the continuous twangs of bowstrings coming from higher up the hill. In just a few breaths, the densely packed tribes on the beach were all shot dead. The arrows were as accurate as if they had eyes, automatically navigating to the throats and other vital points of the orcs. In an instant, the entire beach was empty. "Oh my God, what kind of strong reinforcements did our deputy commander bring back? This is equivalent to a 10,000-man archer legion," King Lang muttered to himself. General Seamus comforted Lang. "I heard that the Windrunner family is the top ranger family in Kuel Salis." Lang felt a little better after hearing that. General Seamus was right about this. The Windrunner family's rangers were indeed the most powerful among the High Elves. Looking at the entire human world, including the High Elves and even the more powerful Night Elves, there was no army that could compare to the Windrunner family's archers. Perhaps the legendary mysterious army that belonged to High Priestess Tyrant could compare to the Windrunner family's rangers. However, the horrors of the tribes were not only in their powerful individual combat power, but also in their terrifying numbers. When they found that there were more and more ships anchored on the western coast, the irascible orcs decisively ignored the orders from their superiors and began to rush their ships to any place that could be anchored. For example, the eastern beach, which had higher mountains and was better defended by humans. Another example was the harbor of South Shore itself. When the first light of dawn broke, the main force of the Horde's beach landing battle finally arrived. The gigantic iron ship crashed into the stone pier with a loud bang, causing the entire pier to shake. Duke saw through his binoculars that the deep water port that he had spent a long time building was smashed into by the group of bastards, and the sky was filled with flying rocks. Duke wished he could kill all the orcs. "Damn it, my secret stash," Duque muttered in his heart. On the other side, Turayan was also muttering, "In the name of the holy light, they are too ugly." Even though Lothar and Duque had described them before, it was still a far cry from seeing them with his own eyes. He did not know if the stronger the orcs were, the uglier they were. Turayan, who had personally witnessed the death of the tribe's laborers, had originally thought that the Horde's warriors were about the size of burly humans, with light green skin and two huge tiger teeth in their mouths. Now Turayan realized that he was completely wrong. The real warriors of the tribe were taller and more burly, and they looked even uglier. They had bright green skin and red eyes that were even redder than a rabbit's. And those huge fangs that could not even be covered by their lips. Turayan swore that he had only seen something like this on a wild boar. But wild boars did not walk on 2 feet, nor did they carry huge heavy weapons, nor did they wear heavy armor. Duque pretended to observe with his binoculars, and then said the answer that was marked in the system notification. "All right, generals, I have good news and bad news." Everyone immediately pricked up their ears. The good news is that the Horde is finally willing to put in the main force. Lothar, you can consider calling back the reserve troops that were stationed outside. Lothar smiled slightly. To be on the safe side, Lothar divided about 1/3 of the troops that had been gathered in South Shore and placed them in the middle of the Hillsbrad Hills, which was probably the inland area between South Shore and Atonement Island. Lothar did not comment on Duque's suggestion, because if they called back the reserve troops, they might not be of any help. If they did not call back the reserve troops, they could still be used as insurance. At most, they would receive complaints from one or two kings that their troops could not do anything. Lothar smiled and asked, "What about the bad news?" Chapter 256. It's the Warsong clan from the tribe. They're not just good at fighting, they're quite good at it. What we need to pay attention to is the roar of their chief, Gromhel. He's a top-notch person, especially you, Commander-in-Chief Lothar. I don't want the Commander-in-Chief of the Alliance to be at the front. I know you're good at fighting too, but there are so many generals around. As the Commander-in-Chief, do you have the cheek to steal the credit of your subordinates? Initially, when he heard Duque say that Grom was impressive, Lothar was really eager to give it a try. After hearing what Duque said, Lothar could only raise his hands to indicate that he wouldn't go to the front line. There was a silent commotion among the other generals when Lothar didn't take action. Pairs of burning eyes looked at Duque, eager for Duque to call out the name of a certain person or a certain legion. The current situation was like a predetermined victory. The only difference was whether the price paid was high. However, it seemed like it would be a great victory for now. Everyone yearned for victory. The kings, who had different thoughts in the first place, were even more eager for their legions to perform well in this battle, because it would affect their country's right to speak in the alliance. Trash had no rights. That wasn't just a matter of words. More and more transport ships arrived at the seaside. There were so many ships from the tribe that the long coastline was actually not enough for all of them. The brave warriors of the Warsong clan pushed the front line to the middle of the mountain. They endured the fist-sized rocks that filled the sky and the arrows that could easily penetrate their bodies. When one fell, another would immediately take his place. When a group fell, a new group would immediately rush in. They were using their flesh and blood to corrode the humans' defense line at a high speed. The agile movements of the Warsong clan warriors, their exaggerated jumping ability, and their violent strength made the soldiers of the Rotterdam very uncomfortable. In just 10 minutes, Mograine had already sent out the reserve team for the third time. Even though he still had sufficient reserves, the sight of such a meat grinder made his heart bleed. They were all the elites of the Rotterdam kingdom. At this moment, 2 red signal flares rose in the direction of the headquarters. In this world where the light of dawn was still very faint, it was especially dazzling. In the east, the 4th Fleet, which had been waiting for a long time, puffed up their sails and arrived at the battlefield within 15 minutes. Then, far from the coast, they fired their cannons at the densely packed coastline. From today onwards, this cruel weapon would probably become one of the most hated weapons in the tribe. 100 thumb-sized relatively round iron lumps could be stuffed into a huge cannon chamber. Because of the short range, Commander Gutierrez ordered that each cannon be loaded with 20% less gunpowder and 30% more grape shot than usual. Bang, bang, bang. Following the loud roar, the coastline that was not particularly wide was immediately set off in a storm of blood. The new armor that the orcs had obtained from the dwarven slaves was completely unable to withstand the impact of such hot weapons. A head-sized bloody hole would immediately appear on their bodies if they were hit by it. Even the lightest injury would be a broken arm or leg. Large pieces of broken limbs flew into the air. There were split heads, splattered intestines, and broken weapons. In a few breaths, the entire coastline had become the orcs' shuraba. The seawater that surged up along with the tide was all dyed red with the blood of the orcs. The tragic scarlet spread hundreds of meters away on the surface of the sea, and it was all orc blood. The tribe's commander ordered the transport ship to rush towards Gutierrez's battleship. Unfortunately, it did not work this time. An orc laborer who was rowing the boat could not help but exclaim, "There's something down there, there's a lot of it." The laborer pointed at the large opening for the oars. As soon as he finished speaking, he was dragged underwater along with the oars. Blood gushed out and it seemed that he would not survive. At this time, there were already quite a number of slightly fat black figures on the surface of the sea. Colorful triangular dorsal fins broke through the water surface, forming white waves. Those who were familiar with them would know at a glance that they were murlocs. It was not the first time that the tribe had dealt with the murlocs. They also knew that the humans of Stormwind City had the ability to tame the murlocs, although they did not know which one. It felt as normal as an orc taming a warg. That alone was not enough to alert the tribe. Until the tribe suddenly realized that the number of murlocs was 2F*King ridiculous. It was impossible to count how many there were. All they knew was that this was definitely more than 10,000. Not only the orcs, but even the human guards on the hill were stunned. At first, Duque did not send out the murlocs because Duque felt that it would not be effective to let the murlocs intercept the transport ships rushing towards the coast at high speed. Now it was different. Most of the gaps along the coast had been filled. If the tribe wanted to reach the shore, they would either have to smash the butt of their own ship and disembark in deeper water, or they would continue west to find a place to dock. In fact, continuing west was the right choice. But the appearance of Gutierrez's fleet dispelled the tribe's commander's thoughts. What was worse was that the transport ships that attempted to attack the Alliance's fleet had all stopped. If the tribe's ships were powered by sails, the Murlocs would not be able to cut off the ship's power. But it was oars. For the Murlocs to deal with wooden oars that were not specially reinforced was a matter of minutes. Under the command of the Murloc Oracle Mager, the Murlocs also became smarter. They worked hard to destroy every Horde transport ship. They used all kinds of methods to break the oars of the laborers and dig into the bottom of the Horde transport ships. Like sardines, the transport ships were packed with hundreds of people. Even if one of them sank, it would be a big loss to the tribe. Looking at the situation of the battle, the 5 kings in the command center were all beaming with joy. Yo Horde, hurry up and play your cards. I don't know who the commander is, but if you don't play your cards, I'll have to take the lives of another 100,000 orcs this time. At this moment, a loud noise suddenly erupted from one of the large battleships in Gutierrez's fleet. In the next second, the huge mast broke, pulling the entire ship and causing it to tilt at an angle of 60 degrees to the water. If the first attack could be reluctantly attributed to an accident, then the second attack was witnessed by Duque with his own eyes. On the left side of the battleship's bow, a huge crack about half a meter wide and at least 7 or 8 meters long was drawn out by a Black Shadow's weapon like it was killing a fish. The entire hull of the battleship let out a sad cry, then the huge bow suddenly broke, the hull tilted, and a large amount of seawater poured into the cabin. Duque could clearly see that many human soldiers had already jumped into the sea to escape. Damn. Who was it? That didn't make sense? Duque screamed in his heart. The next moment he saw the killer's weapon. It was a dark red axe that looked like a hook. That was a certain Roar's signature weapon. Blood Howl? Chapter 257. Grom Hellroar was mighty and domineering. Whether it was his trademark roar, his courage, or his unparalleled violent attack power. Tearing a lion apart with his bare hands and going through countless battles without a single defeat was not enough to describe the domineering Grom, whom Duque had called Lord Howl before he transmigrated. If one had to describe Grom's strength in one sentence, it would be that he could dismantle a Gundam with his bare hands. The story began with Grom's father, Galmash Hellroar, whom Duque called Grandpa Howl. Galmash was the chief of the Warsong clan. He was a powerful warrior during his lifetime and was known as the Giant Butcher. Few orcs could be like him, both deeply respected by his own clansmen and terrifying his enemies. One time, Galmash and his clansmen encountered a huge Golan, and a fierce battle ensued. What was a Golan? A Golan was a terrifying one-eyed monster that was 2 or 3 times taller than an ogre. Duque believed that only the one-eyed giants of ancient Greece before he transmigrated could be the prototype of this monster called Golan. During the fierce battle, Galmash was caught by the Golan. When his body was bitten to pieces by the Golan's guillotine-like mouth, Galmash endured the pain and used the last of his strength to chop his battle axe, Gorehowl, into the Golan's eye before he died. When they fell, the first to die was the Golan. After this battle, Gorehowl became famous everywhere and became the symbol of the Warsong clan's chief. Galmash eventually earned the surname Hellroar for his clan. The Hellroar clan was also very good at fighting huge things. For example, such a huge warship had been dismantled by Grom in a few moves. Were the tribal heroes really monsters? Although Duque wanted to push Lothar, who had the highest combat power on his side, and Uther, who had just arrived last night, to fight Lord Howl for 300 rounds, the problem was that this was King naval battle. Could Lothar and Uther, who were fully armored, win? Don't be ridiculous. If these 2 powerful people drowned because of this reason, Duque would not be able to forgive himself. Just as Uther was about to step out and ask to fight with a fearless spirit of sacrifice, Duque said, "Hey Aurelia, Servanas, do you hear me?" An echo immediately came from the wind. Aurelia awaits Deputy Commander's orders. Yo, there's finally something exciting to do? Duque cleared his throat and said, "I want you 2 sisters to deal with the onion-haired orc chief who just tore down our warship. Yes, the one with the blood-red hooked axe. His name was Grom Hellscream and he was one of the strongest fighters in the Horde. Don't be careless. I promise I'll kill him." Aurelia was as steady as ever. "Oh. Sister, let's not compete in killing enemies. Those moving targets aren't that great. Let's compete to see who can kill more chiefs." This time, it was a voice that only Duque could hear. Duque was under a lot of pressure when faced with such an off-topic Queen Sylvanas. Uther couldn't help it anymore. He stepped forward and said, "Deputy Commander, Uther and his silver hand request to fight." Duque glanced at Uther, who was much older than him, and said, "I know your chivalry can't stand having a woman fight on your behalf. But I want to tell you, first, don't treat the sisters as weak. Second, unless you're very good at swimming in armor, leave it to the two sisters." Uther was quite annoyed by Duque, but as a noble paladin, he knew very well that Duque was not targeting him or looking down on his silver hand. It was just that Uther was as puzzled as the other generals. Why did Duque seem to know their abilities and specialties so well? From the beginning of the Battle of South Shore, Duque's formation had no flaws or problems. Not only could he predict the enemy, but he was also very clear about his own people. The problem was that Duque hadn't even visited their troops. Naturally, Duque didn't have time to explain to them. Or perhaps Duque couldn't explain at all. He'd arranged it according to which of them was more powerful in history. No matter what, the destructive power of a heroic existence was shocking. As someone who also had a heroic template, Lord Howl had already used Bloodhowl to dismantle 5 warships of various sizes by the time the Windrunner sisters arrived. Grum didn't let his guard down at all just because the 2 beautiful elven rangers were dainty and delicate. On the contrary, his instincts towards the strong made Grum very nervous. It was as if he was a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. His ability to jump over the transport ships and even the junk floating on the sea was beyond Grom's imagination. This level of agility was unheard of. Grom Hellscream felt a wave of disgust. This was the unique aesthetics of the orcs. The Windrunner sisters were as beautiful as goddesses in the eyes of humans, but in the eyes of the orcs, who loved broad shoulders, thick waists, and large hips, they were weak goods that couldn't give birth to strong children. Lord Howl's disdainful gaze made Aurelia the Great Demon King and Queen Sylvanas even more displeased. Umph. 6 nostrils and 3 heroes snorted coldly. It had to be said that this was a strange misunderstanding. It didn't matter. Only a dead enemy was the best enemy. This principle was applicable in every world. Since they didn't speak the same language, there was no need to greet each other. The Windrunner sisters and Lord Howl faced each other directly. They moved forward on the waves so fast that the naked eye couldn't keep up with them. The Windrunner sisters stood on the left and right. They shot a barrage of arrows while approaching Lord Howl at high speed. Grom grabbed a stack of shields hanging on the railing of the ship. He easily tore the ropes binding the shields. They were originally used by humans for boarding battles, but Lord Howl pulled them up. 5 or 6 shields turned into flying discs that could cut a human in half and were thrown out. Of course, such a rough throw wouldn't hit. Sylvanas actually took a step forward with her slender and beautiful legs, stepping on those floating shields and flying high up in the sky. In just 10 seconds, Grom was hit by at least 30 arrows. He looked bloody and miserable, but the Windrunner sisters realized that none of the arrows actually penetrated Grom's muscles or hit his organs. The arrows that were aimed at Grom's fatal spots were either blocked or dodged by Bloodhowl. Just as the Windrunner sisters were within 5 meters of Grom, Lord Howl counterattacked. A deafening roar spread out like a shockwave around the sinking ship, and the 2 sisters trembled. The next moment, the wooden boards under Lord Howl's feet turned to dust. With a swift leap, he slashed at Sylvanas. Chapter 258. Lord Howl's leap slash was unscientific. In a fantasy world with all kinds of special skills, talking about science was bullsh*t. It looked like a simple leap and fall, but whether it was going up or down, it had nothing to do with the acceleration of gravity. Bloodhowl, as blazing red light shot into the sky. For a moment, it was like a scarlet sun had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. It was shocking and dazzling. The next moment, Grom, who held the axe with both hands, slashed down like a falling meteor. Speed up, speed up, speed up continuously. Insanely fast speed up. A moment ago, Grom was still about 10 meters away from Sylvanas. It felt like Queen Sylvanas could easily dodge with a light stomp of her feet. In the next moment, the sharp tip of the axe had already chopped down on a few strands of Queen Syriana's bangs that were leaking out of her hood. At this moment, the sharp whistle of the axe cutting through the air had just spread. This attack broke the speed of sound. This was the attack that the Hellscream family was famous for. Lord Howl's father had used this attack to kill countless ogres and Gollin. Lord Howl himself would also kill the night elf demigod Cenarius and the demon lord of the abyss, Manaroth, who was even bigger than the heavy truck Duque was in before he transmigrated. No. When Duque, who was in the command center, saw this scene through the magician's eye that had been monitoring the battlefield, He was so shocked that he stood up abruptly. Cold sweat instantly soaked his entire back. Could it be that Queen Sylvanas, who was supposed to shine brightly on the stage of the world of Azeroth in the future, would fall here? It was still World War II at the Dark Portal. There was no Doomsday Army at all. It could be said that Queen Sylvanas' death here was death. She would never be reincarnated. Unless, Duque did not dare to imagine it. However, in his nervousness and shock, Duque had forgotten someone, Aurelia. As the big sister of the Windrunner family, how could she let her sister die in front of her? Indeed, Sylvanas was still immature. She was far from the all-powerful Dark Ranger and Queen of the Undead in the future, who could shake the world with a stomp of her foot. This was the reason why Duque had asked the two sisters to deal with Master Ho in the name of the Alliance's deputy marshal. Aurelia raised her leg and kicked Queen Sylvanas in the butt, allowing her to narrowly avoid the attack. Bloodhowl was still slashing down. Seeing that she could not hit Aurelia, Queen Sylvie was about to chop off one of Aurelia's legs. Illyria's battle-hardened experience came into play. In that split second, she used the 3 arrows in her right hand to stab Grom's face. At the same time, the muscles on her abdomen bulged. She used her waist strength to turn her kick into a whip kick towards Grom's knee. Perhaps Grom could chop off one of Aurelia's legs. However, the price was that Master Ho's face would be pierced by 3 arrows. This was a fighting style that traded injuries for lives. Grom's expression changed and a serious expression appeared on his rugged face. He didn't expect that such a delicate and strange human could actually have such a ferocious fighting style. He finally realized that it wouldn't be that easy to win. Grom cancelled his jump slash. The muscles on his arm bulged and he swung a whirlwind slash, instead of a slash. In the blink of an eye, a violent tornado appeared. All the surrounding wood was chopped into sawdust, and even the seawater was sucked away. Grom looked like a small tornado on the ocean. The Windrunner sisters jumped away swiftly. "Sister, are you all right?" Sylvanas knew that her carelessness had dragged her sister into this. She couldn't help but look at Aurelia's leg, which had been cut into pieces and was bleeding. Aurelia's face twitched. She wanted to comfort her sister and say that she was fine, but in the end she said in High Elf language, "I'm fine, but I'll be a little slower." Orcs had thick skin and flesh, so they were fine even after being hit by dozens of arrows. However, for the Windrunner who relied on speed and agility for a living, being a little slower could mean the difference between life and death. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that Grom's strong physique allowed him to make many mistakes. If the Windrunner sisters made one mistake, they would be doomed eternally. Gritting her teeth, Queen Sylvanas said coldly, "Sister, cover him from afar." Even though she was a little worried, this was the only way. While Grom's whirlwind slash was over, Sylvanas slung her longbow and unsheathed her sword. Aurelia, on the other hand, opened up a distance of 20 meters and covered her sister with a continuous barrage of shots. In the command center, Duque finally relaxed when he saw that the Windrunner sisters and Hellscream were evenly matched. This was an exchange of chess pieces. Duque suddenly had an idea. He wasn't afraid of the orcs attacking with a large army, but what if a few powerful chiefs came? Although there was only one Hellscream, there were many talented orcs and Grom Hellscream wasn't the only one. There were also Gujar and Samuro. Wait. Samuro? Duque suddenly realized where his weakness was. Tyrion Fordring. Unsure why Duque would call his name without Uther, Tyrion, who was ready to go down the mountain at any time, stepped forward. "Yes. I'm worried about General Lang Rin at the front lines. I need you to go there immediately and follow General Lang closely during this battle." Bodyguard. Tyrion's face was a little gloomy. In his opinion, a paladin should be the kind of person who charged and broke through enemy lines, not a bodyguard. Duque's voice came again. "I suddenly remembered that the orcs have a special class called Blade Master. They have a stealth ability similar to thieves, but they move faster and seem to have some kind of strange power when they attack. Tyrion, this is a heavy responsibility. If something happens to General Lang, it will be a heavy blow to not only the battle for South Shore but the entire alliance. If you go this time, no matter what happens, I will remember you." Understood. Duque's transfer was a matter of life and death. Ryan was wearing a golden helmet and armor. Although he could arouse the courage of the Stormwind soldiers, his existence was also very conspicuous to the tribe. Just as a sword suddenly slashed at Lang from behind, Tyrion arrived. Holy shock! One of the few long-range attacks of a paladin. The attack came at the most needed time and place. The sneak attack stunned the Blade Master for a moment. It was also at this moment that Lang and General Tom realized what was going on. Two intersecting swords slashed at the blurry figure that was gradually becoming clearer. However, this blade master obviously didn't give up. Blade storm suddenly rolled up. Chapter 259. It was another tornado-like attack, but compared to Grom's whirlwind slash, the blade storm was the real tornado, the real killer move. A terrifying tornado made of blood and wind swept up from the top of the mountain. Under the high-speed rotation, whether it was Theon, Lang, or Tom, they all lost track of the mysterious sword saint who had ambushed them. They could barely see a green figure spinning at high speed in the turbulent air currents. As Lang retreated with his sword, the Wang family guards beside him rushed forward without any regard for their own lives. The result was that the guards were instantly minced into meat paste. Looking at the familiar faces he had known for many years being killed by the sword, Lang almost wanted to rush into the storm of sword energy and fight it out with the other party. Tom Seamus slammed backwards, using his sturdy pauldrons to push Lang out of the blade storm as killing range. However, the other party chased after him like a shadow, determined to kill Lang. This was no longer a swordsmanship. The high-speed rotation of his body brought with it countless sword energies that were like real swords, slashing horizontally at everything that tried to block his way. The human bodies clad in standard iron armor, the thickened shields wrapped in wooden planks, the trenches dug around the mountain, and the stone pillboxes, everything looked so sturdy. However, all these seemingly indestructible things had become victims of the blade storm as terrifying meat grinder. The human body was cut into pieces, and even if it was picked up, it would not know how to piece it back together. The shield was cut into pieces. The trenches were instantly opened up, and the stone pillbox was directly lifted off the roof. The attack of this berserk sword saint was completely beyond human imagination. At this moment, Lang suddenly calmed down and accepted reality. He was very grateful to Tyrion Fordring who came at the last moment, and he knew very well that he was sent by Duque at a critical moment. But this kind of power was not something a mortal could resist, right? Listening to the high-speed cutting sound, Lang helplessly closed his eyes with a bitter smile. 1 second. 2 seconds. 5 seconds. The blade that represented death never came. Instead, it emitted an intense sound of metal clashing not far from him. Theon's tall and burly figure stood in front of him and Seamus like a nail. The storm of blades slashed at him. Countless swords on his body? Dismember the corpse into 10,000 pieces? None of this happened. Instead, Lang saw an oval cover that glowed with a holy golden light appear on Theon's body. It was this shield that withstood the seemingly invincible blade storm. Was this really a god? Looking at the System Elf's report, Duque was a little confused. Congratulations, Tyrion Fordring, who you urgently dispatched to the eastern battlefield, saved King Lang at the critical moment with blessing of sacrifice and divine protection. King Lang's attitude towards you has risen to entrust life and death. Duque knew what it meant, but Duque was more interested in Theon's two skills. Blessing of sacrifice. Use the power of the holy light to protect an ally, so that the user of the blessing bears a portion of any kind of damage. Divine protection. Stimulate the holy light in the body, using the power of the holy light to make oneself immune to all attacks for a few seconds. The holy light in this world seemed to be more powerful than he had imagined. On the other side, seeing that he couldn't kill Lang even with his ultimate move, the mysterious sword saint reluctantly retreated. His figure disappeared into thin air. After using his ultimate move, he would probably fall into a period of weakness for a long time. That kind of terrifying move, which concentrated all of his strength for a few days in an instant, would not come without a price. You wouldn't have to worry about that guy for a long time. At this time, in the image of the mage's eyes, he saw that Duque had sent Theon to save King Lang. There was a burst of applause in the command center. That's amazing, Vice Commander. Oh my God, how did you think of that? Duque was flattered because this was praise from the 5 kings of the Alliance. Although he had saved his boss, saving Lang was also helping these kings. With a great enemy in front of them, no one wanted the Alliance to fall apart. Well, now we just need to. Before Duque finished speaking, he saw a hunchbacked figure appear in the vision of the mage's eyes. In the next instant, the mage's eyes was destroyed. However, Duque saw that on the 2 hilltops closest to the port, 2 fire rain areas the size of 4 football fields had fallen. A fire rain area the size of 8 football fields? Was this done by an ordinary warlock? Duke and Antonidas looked out of the window at the same time, looking at the burning hills in the distance, and the people on fire who were writhing in pain. Those little people on fire in their field of vision were the elites of the Alliance. On top of the hill, the volume of the screams suddenly doubled and then quickly quieted down. And on the beach, naturally, the cheers of the orcs burst out. With the help of the system elf, a figure that was originally just a small black dot rapidly expanded in Duque's vision, and expanded again and again. It was a hunchbacked orc holding an evil skull staff. His face was old, his movements unsteady, and his back was full of huge bone spikes. It felt like this guy didn't need anyone to touch him, he might throw himself to his death on the road in the next second. But no matter who Duque looked down on, he wouldn't look down on this mysterious orc who used water float to stand on the waves, his body swaying up and down with the waves. He was the terrifying existence that stood at the end of the path of evil in the mortal world. The muscles on Duque's face kept twitching, and his face was ashen as he squeezed out 3 words with great difficulty. Ghoul, Dan. Duque was absolutely sure that the historical ghoul, Dan, did not participate in the Battle of the Hillsbrad Hills. He didn't know if it was because the butterfly Duque had changed the course of fate too much, but it actually attracted Ghoul, Dan. The only thing he could rejoice about now was that Ghoul, Dan was no longer that demigod Ghoul, Dan. After being tricked by Mediv, Ghoul, Dan's strength had dropped by at least half. Unfortunately, even if Ghoul, Dan's strength had dropped by half, he was still not someone that the Sky Wizard Duque could contend against. Duque walked over to Antonidas and bowed deeply. Apologies, Chairman Antonidas. The other party was once a demigod warlock, the strongest orc in the mysterious domain, Ghoul, Dan. Other than you, only Kuel Salus Sun King can contend against him. Facing the expectant gazes from all directions, Antonidas leaned on his staff and stroked his long white beard, his face filled with the pride of a strong person. Ah! The Dalajan will not refuse responsibility. The same goes for the Dalajan chairman. Chapter 260. Duque heaved a sigh of relief when Antonidas agreed to fight. Ghoul, Dan's appearance really made Duque feel like he was in a dog's den. Duque knew that a treacherous fellow like Ghoul, Dan would not work for Orgrim wholeheartedly. However, there were some enemies in this world that even if you knew they wouldn't be serious, you still had to deal with them with all your might. This was a boss, this was power. Duque looked at Ghoul, Dan's arrogant figure and bit his lips. After he was done with this, he really had to cultivate his strength properly. His strength had to match the situation. Duque knew that even as a Breaking Dawn wizard, he would not be able to survive an attack from hundreds of thousands of beastmen. Moreover, he was not one yet. Without the support of the Alliance, even if he had the strength of a god, he would still be overwhelmed to death. In the future, Antonidas had died here, as had the Sun King and Astrian Sunstrider. Fortunately, Duque was not the one who had to face Ghoul, Dan head-on today. Antonidas lightly waved his staff in the air. Without anyone seeing how he chanted an incantation, mysterious runes formed a long line in the air in front of them. 3 seconds later, this line was stretched open by some mysterious power, turning into an oval that allowed one person to pass through. On the other side of the circle of light was the empty gate of South Shore. That was the gate that connected the docks to South Shore. The beastmen were not idiots. They knew that if they did not get rid of the humans on the 2 hills and rushed into the town, they would just be sending themselves to their deaths. Under the scolding of the tribe's commanders, the beastmen all charged towards the hills. In the midst of the intense battle, there was an empty patch of land. The next moment, Antonidas appeared alone at the gates of the town. Oh, I didn't think there would be a human wizard who would dare to fight? Ghoul, Dan muttered in the human language 200 meters away. However, he knew that Antonidas would hear him. I also want to know what kind of strength a demigod once had. Antonidas was old and shrewd. It seemed to be a compliment, but in fact, it was an outright insult. Ghoul, Dan waved his magic staff and death ripples formed from the power of darkness spread out from the surface of the sea. Instantly, countless fishmen 100 meters away were hit. For a moment, the entire surface of the sea surged. Large amounts of blood and corpses were boiling and roaring like boiling water. Ghoul Dan's face was black as he coldly replied, I can kill you even with half of my strength. Come. Antonidas beckoned. Without further ado, the 2 men's spells collided in mid-air. At that moment, the whole of South Shore, with the dock as the boundary, flashed with elemental light of different colors. On the side close to the town, fire, ice, and arcana runes of 3 different colors appeared densely. With the dock as the boundary, the side close to the sea flashed with overlapping crimson flames and black shadow magic formations, and they also contained a large amount of mysterious and evil aura. 2 completely different scenes occupied the center of the battlefield, completely enveloping the whole of South Shore and spreading in all directions. The next moment, the spells that poured out from the magic formations around the two men collided. The destructive flames and bone-chilling ice collided fiercely in midair. The ice shards and the aftermath of the flames formed a terrifying steam that roasted any creature that tried to get close to it. The evil shadow arrows were scattered by the fireballs, dyeing the nearby grass black, and the vitality of all the plants and animals that came into contact with them instantly withered. The aftermath of the scattered flames was not inferior in any way. It easily burned everything that could be burned. The azure arcane radiance violently shot at the curses that were mysteriously drifting over, rendering the warlock's most mysterious pain attribute curses useless. The battle between these two was even more terrifying than the battle of 10 wizard squads. The shockwaves of the fierce battle easily swept through the town. Duque had long since decided to make South Shore the main battlefield, and he had long since moved the residents away. However, seeing these two freakishly powerful people fight, Duque was still overwhelmed with shock. After all, this was not even Ghoul Dan at his peak. Even now, Ghoul Dan still had to use more than half of his power to maintain the darkness portal. In other words, Ghoul Dan had used less than a quarter of his power to fight Antonidas, one of the two Breaking Dawn wizards in the world of Azeroth, to a draw. At this moment, the whole of South Shore, as well as the places between the two hills, seemed to have encountered a terrifying natural disaster. It was a combination of a tornado and an earthquake. The brick and wood houses on both sides of the main road above the town collapsed like dominoes. Huge trees were thrown into the air by the powerful shockwaves, but before they landed, they would be bombarded by 2 or 3 different kinds of magic. Duque saw with his own eyes the top half of a tree being burned, the bottom half frozen, and finally turned into powder by the shadow arrows. Antonidas raised his staff, and the sea around Ghoul Dan was instantly interwoven with a blue magical radiance. In less than half a second, nearly 100 giant water elementals with 2 thick arms and their upper bodies in the shape of an inverted triangle suddenly appeared from the sea. These water elementals did not say anything, and directly shot over 100 frost arrows at Ghoul Dan. Ghoul Dan also waved his hand, and dozens of dark blue inverted triangular blue fatties appeared beside him. These strange demons that came from the void used their huge bodies as the best magic shields. At the same time, near the town gate, a spatial passage connected to the void was opened, and many demon hounds that targeted magic professions pounced out, charging straight at Antonidas. Umph! The Dalajan president snorted coldly. Countless ice spikes appeared from the ground and pierced into the sky. The demon hounds that should have been able to suppress mages had no resistance against the physical damage caused by the elemental transformation. As if they were skewered, their abdomens were easily pierced from the bottom up. Some of them even had their heads cut off by the ice, and they became corpses before they could rise up. The magic energy that burst out of their bodies formed a terrifying pressure. This kind of pressure could easily draw an invisible boundary on the battlefield. Even if there were no magic waves in that area, those who were not strong enough would not dare to cross it. Seeing that Duque's arrangement had once again offset the horde's attack, Lothar walked over. "What are you waiting for, Duque?" "I'm waiting for the exchange. When the horde's cards are gone, it will be the death of the 100,000 horde troops," Duque said coldly. Chapter 261. Everyone in the command center's eyes lit up. They didn't know how many soldiers the horde had left. Adding the 100,000 orcs here and the ones intercepted by Dalen's fleet, it was definitely a heavy blow to the horde. From the looks of it, the humans wouldn't lose more than 20,000 people. No matter how one looked at it, this was a great victory that only happened once in a century. Duque had just retracted his gaze from the Windrunner sisters, who were evenly matched with Master Howl. He was shocked to find that the battle between the strongest sorcerer of Azeroth and the strongest sorcerer of Draenor had already come to an end. It was a draw. Antonidas and Ghoul Dan clutched at their wounds. The left shoulder of Antonidas' sorcerer robe had been burned. A black rune with an evil aura was wriggling on Antonidas' old body. Antonidas was using arcane energy to dispel the rune, but it wasn't very effective. On the other side, Ghoul Dan had also been hit. A huge ice prism had pierced through his left shoulder. From the wound, ice patterns spread toward Ghoul Dan's heart like a spider web. Ghoul Dan injected the destructive flames in his hand into his shoulder to resist the invasion of the cold. "I'll spare your life today. Next time I'll leave your filthy head behind." The two of them turned around and left without hesitation. Antonidas reluctantly teleported back to the command center. Ghoul, Dan waved his hand and turned into a cloud of black fog, disappearing from the sea. Master, how are you? Uther, come and help. The place where Antonidas was covered started to emit thick darkness. The sticky black aura had a strong sense of ominous, and it tried to drill into the depths of the old magician's body and corrode his magic circuits. Fortunately, Uther's holy light was even brighter. Even though sweat was dripping from his forehead, Uther spent about 5 minutes to completely dispel the darkness. Thank you. It seems like the Holy Knight is a great profession, Antonidas praised sincerely. Antonidas praised from the bottom of his heart. He then turned to Duke. What a terrifying orc warlock. I'm no match for him. If I go all out, I'll definitely be the one to die. At most, I'll only be able to injure him moderately. I don't know why he's pretending to be heavily injured. All I can say is that he'll need at most a week to recover, but I might not be able to fight for the Alliance by then. Don't worry. He won't come again. Duque said with absolute certainty. Are you sure? Yes. Duque turned to look at Crassus in the Dalajan crowd. Please send Mr. President back to the Dalajan first, and then ask Archbishop Fao to go to the Dalajan and check Mr. President thoroughly. It would have been best to send Antonidas to Lordaeron. Due to political reasons, Antonidas would rather stay in his old nest to recuperate. Crassus quickly opened a portal, connected it to the Dalajan, and sent Antonidas away. Not long after, Crassus opened a portal and hurried back. The orcs were not stupid. After their several charges were repelled, no matter how stupid they were, they realized that with so many people crowded on the coast, sooner or later they would be wiped out. They gave up the blind attack and seemed to be waiting for something. Duque's pupils suddenly shrank to the size of a needle's eye. It's here. It's finally here. Duque stood up and slammed his hand on the table. Pass the order. All cavalry regiments are ready to launch a countercharge against the enemy along the established route. All reserves are to enter combat positions, with the spear team and the javelin team as the main force. It was finally their turn. In the command center, a group of tough generals had been waiting impatiently. If it weren't for Duque's magnificent command, suppressing the tribes time and time again, maybe some kings would have protested. Now with Duque's order, more than half of the people in the command center left. As he walked down the hill, Uther was a little puzzled. General Lothar, are we going to counterattack from the ruins of South Shore to the coast? I'm still wondering about this order. Are there any cavalry on the tribe's side? I don't think there's anything in the tribe that can stop your cavalry regiment and my silver hand. General Haas, the commander of Alterac, was also puzzled. It's even more strange on my side. They actually want my Eagle Knights to attack the enemy along the slope of the East Hill, which is not too steep. The Eagle Knights are indeed mountain knights, and they are also used to fighting in complex terrain. But I see that General Lang's infantry is also doing well. I can't think of a reason for reinforcements. Lothar smiled. It was an extremely sunny smile. Can you write 10 or 20 reports at the same time? No, Uther answered truthfully. How is that possible? Haas asked rhetorically. But I know that strong mages have the metamagic ability, multicasting. That is, the ability to do two things at the same time or even many things. Duque is such a genius he can quickly read many times more reports than we do. He also often finds a lot of details that we don't notice. For those threats that he is uncertain about, he will make preparations, but because he can't convince everyone he will be used to silence. Lothar paused and continued, however, it has been proven again and again that the preparations he has made and the backup he has arranged are correct and effective. Even if I don't want to admit it, I have to admit that he is above me in terms of the overall situation and the art of command. If he were a melee professional, maybe he would be the commander-in-chief. What Lothar said was another fact of this era. People who regarded chivalry as the supreme tended to admire melee heroes more than the mysterious and unpredictable spellcasters. More people subconsciously believed that only those who fought head-on were real men. 10 minutes later, the signal to attack came. Many new creatures appeared on the coast, much taller than the orcs. Except for a few orcs who could be more than 3 meters tall, the orcs were generally about 2.5 meters tall. But these creatures could easily reach a height of about 4 meters. Ogres. These huge creatures joined the battle. They waved giant sticks that looked like uprooted trees. They roared and rushed up the hill. Bows and javelins were useless. Even if a dozen spears pierced the bodies of the ogres, they wouldn't be able to end the lives of these ferocious monsters unless they pierced their vitals. And every time the giant wooden sticks were swung, a bunker was smashed and an entire row of shield soldiers was smashed away. The shield wall that the humans relied on to fight against the orcs became the biggest fatal weakness, which allowed the ogres to cause massive casualties with every blow. Apart from the ballistae and cannons on the top of the hill, there was nothing that could stop the march of these giant creatures. The soldiers were defeated by this powerful blow. The orc soldiers attacked through those gaps and quickly spread out, sweeping up the alliance soldiers in the trenches. A group of figures wearing heavy cloaks and riding heavily armored warhorses appeared on the slightly dilapidated pier, each horse's eyes shining with dazzling red light. Chapter 262. The Eagle Knights led by Haas attacked the horde along the river at the foot of the eastern hill. Now that Antonidas and Gul'dan were no longer in the way, in order to attack the eastern mountain in a more comprehensive manner, many tribes first came to the river bank and then took a detour to attack the mountain from the side. When the Eagle Knights arrived, the defensive line on the hill was already very tight. On the front line, Tyrion and General Tom could often be seen leading the reserves as firefighters to fill in the gaps in the position. From time to time, even Lang had to personally lead the troops into battle. The only good thing was that Stormwind's reserves were quite sufficient. It was just that the casualty ratio was shocking. It was under these circumstances that the Eagle Knights circled around to the flank of the horde attacking the hill. "Level your spears," Haas shouted. The knights lowered their nearly 4-meter-long spears and urged their mountain horses to charge from the side. Alterax's Eagle Knights weren't heavy cavalry in the traditional sense. Considering the mountainous terrain, the armor of this group of knights was between light cavalry and heavy cavalry. They didn't have heavy armor, only light chainmail and a layer of leather armor. The warhorses were also only equipped with a piece of leather armor. On the complicated terrain of the river and the hills, the Eagle Knights performed quite well. With the heavy sound of hooves, the knights quickly scattered, looking for their own targets. When the target was more than 2 meters away, they had already stabbed their spears, hitting the enemy's vitals. At the same time, the momentum of the warhorses pierced deep into the enemy's body. At the same time, the well-designed spear couldn't withstand the powerful reaction force and began to explode to the side. The unlucky ones who were stabbed fell to the ground, and the knights casually abandoned the remaining half of the spear, pulled out Alterax's special double-edged broadsword, and slashed at the horde's warrior's neck. The quick charge cut off the horde's fierce attack. But Haas didn't stop. He took his men around the beach and quickly retreated from the river. The cavalry that had lost their speed couldn't even be compared to the infantry when faced with the tall orcs. Moreover, in that kind of fierce battle the Eagle Knights suffered a lot of losses. The regular forces were dealt with by the regular troops. Transcendent monsters were naturally dealt with by the insanely strong paladins. Uther, who was charging forward, quickly saw the opponent that Duque had almost tailor-made for them. They covered their faces with scarves so only their eyes could be seen. Each of them carried a huge two-handed sword. The cavalry from Lordaeron treated them like fools and were prepared to teach them a lesson with their spears. In the rules of cavalry, it was common sense to charge at each other with a lance. Using a heavy sword against a lance, this was the only way. In their hearts, they were praising their luck, and were prepared to make use of the advantage of their lances to take down the enemy. Wuther heard countless unfamiliar buzzing sounds. 30 meters away, the charging cavalrymen fell to the ground in front of these guys. Even the cavalrymen of the Rotterdam Kingdom who did not fall to their deaths on the spot did not draw their swords to attack the moment they got up. Instead, they felt as if they were about to bleed from their 7 orifices as they clutched their heads tightly with both hands. Ah! The cavalrymen rolled on the ground in pain and let out inhuman howls. In the name of the holy light. Wuther witnessed all this with his own eyes. At this moment he completely understood why Duque wanted the Silverhand Knights to fight against these cloaked guys. These are demons. They are using evil magic to attack us. After saying that, Wuther raised his warhammer high. Several holy seals were added to the warhammer, and the top of the warhammer emitted a silver light like the moon. "Stand up, soldiers," Wuther shouted in his loud voice. "The holy light will drive away the darkness, but you must use your weapons to defend your honor." Dazzling light spread from the warhammer, echoing the bright light of dawn, and instantly driving away the darkness from the land. The holy light shone on the warriors, and when the cloaked men raised their hands again, not a single one of them fell. Although the people who got up and the cavalry behind them were still a little scared, when they found that no one fell, they mustered their courage again and let out a deafening roar, charging towards the cloaked knights. However, at the moment of fighting, not only the cavalrymen, but even Wuther was stunned. This was because this group of guys were wearing the standard armor of the Stormwind cavalry. The only difference was that they used the spiked pauldrons commonly used by tribal warriors. No. Why? A Rotterdam cavalry screamed. During the days of gathering in South Shore, they had been repeatedly asked by their officers to identify the equipment of the various allies. They could not accept suddenly finding their allies standing on the opposite side of the enemy. While they were in a daze, many of them fell to the ground. Wuxia saw the other party's face clearly again. Their faces were pale, lifeless, and bloodless. A pair of evil blue eyes glowed with clear hostility. Most importantly, Wuxia did not feel any life from them. Blasphemy. The filthy tribal warlocks actually resurrected the dead into living corpses? Silverhand, defeat them. Wuxia waved his huge two-handed hammer and easily knocked a Death Knight off his undead warhorse. Abundant golden holy light poured into the Death Knight's body, and the guy was blown to pieces by the holy light before he reached the ground. The Alliance soldiers cheered again, encouraged by the amazing skills and power of the paladin. Turalian, who was at the rear, felt very conflicted. As a paladin, he should be with them, but as Lothar's adjutant, he should stay in the center of South Shore and accompany Lothar to command. The battle between the paladin and the Death Knight began, and neither side could gain the upper hand. At the beginning, Wuxia killed 4 or 5 Death Knights in a row, but he immediately met his opponent. A tall guy who claimed to be Terran Gorfiend actually withstood Wuxia's attack. Turalian saw a Death Knight grab Dathrahan's arm with one hand when they were competing in strength. That hand that looked like a corpse radiated darkness. However, Dathrahan used the holy light to dispel the darkness. Immediately after, Dathrahan took advantage of the moment when that guy retracted his hand and directly hit his head with his hammer. Their skulls shattered like broken porcelain. Turalian noticed that there was not a drop of blood flowing out of the skull. It was all dry brain matter. On the other hand, the Death Knights were able to win against the normal Alliance cavalry. Turalian suddenly noticed the signal coming from the hill. Chapter 263. The Death Knights and Ogres were indeed 2 big cards. If they were ambushed by these 2 troops, the Alliance would definitely suffer heavy casualties. As a transmigrator, Duque remembered at least 70% to 80% of history. When a surprise attack was no longer a surprise attack, the so-called surprise attack would only be a joke. Duque raised his hands and waved his index fingers at the sky. Windsor immediately understood. Send my order, the Dalajan mages get ready. Your Excellency Kel, Thuzad? Your Excellency Krasis? No problem. We've been ready for a long time. Both of them replied affirmatively through the magic communication. Below, the 2 cavalries fighting fiercely on the ruins of South Shore were already fighting for real. Send my order to retreat. Turalian shouted to the nearest messenger. He knew that this person would use his horn to spread the order. Cover each other. Retreat outside the town and regroup. The soldier nodded and raised his horn. He blew it twice, then another long horn. After hearing this, the squad leader began to shout orders to his own team to gather their soldiers. In fact, it was not easy, especially in a chaotic situation where both sides were entangled. Fortunately, the Rotterdam cavalry had made arrangements early in the morning, and their tactical execution was quite good. They took out chain-flying hammers that looked like hinges used for cannons. These little things with 2 round metal balls connected by chains in the middle was a simplified version of a tripwire. They were thrown directly at the leg of the Death Knight's horse. Under the effect of inertia, the small ball would naturally spin around the horse's leg. Regardless of whether it was a dead horse or a flaming horse, its speed would still be reduced. Most of the cavalries got rid of their opponents. The Hand of Silver was in charge of the rear position. The Death Knights who did not receive new orders chose to pursue. Just as the Alliance cavalry pulled away from the Death Knights, bright lights flashed on both sides of the hills. The Dalajan mages. Even when the main battlefield was at its most critical, Duque did not send out these killing weapons like the Pharaoh. Even when the Ogre mages appeared on the battlefield and beat up the mages of the Storm King family and the Rotterdam Kingdom on the 2 hills, Duque did not use them at all. Good steel should be used on the blade's edge. In Duque's opinion, a battle of attrition between a mage and a warlock was too boring. If he wanted to use it, he would use it to eliminate the enemy's elites. This was only the second battle at the Dark Portal. Before the Doomsday Army came out, the Death Knights of the Horde were very valuable. Although the bodies of these Death Knights belonged to Stormwind City, their souls were those of Ghoul, Dan's warlocks who were killed by Orgrim. Only these warlocks could allow newborn Death Knights to easily grasp dark magic. It doesn't matter if these warlocks are high-ranked warlocks or apprentice warlocks, in any case, one dead is one less. As long as they die here, paladins can purify their souls, even Ghoul Dan can't resurrect them as Death Knights. The name of the battle this time was Beastman's Blood. With the amplification of the battle magic formation, the power and range of each mage's magic were greatly increased. The money spent on this magic formation alone was enough to equip an infantry regiment of 5,000 people. Was all worth it? The huge fireball that blotted out the sky and covered the earth poured down from the hills on both sides, leaving long trails of flames behind. That spectacular scene made countless people raise their eyebrows. Even the retreating Rotterdam cavalry and paladins of the Silver Hand couldn't help but be tongue-tied. It was too magnificent. The fireballs that poured down from both sides were like two huge waterfalls of fire, easily crossing the distance of hundreds of meters and blasting towards the Death Knights. The fireballs fell on the ruins of South Shore like a torrential rain, causing an effect that exceeded everyone's imagination. South Shore, which had become incomparably dilapidated after the battle between Antonidas and Ghoul Dan, was now injected with the elemental life force called flames and came to life. Everything surged with flames, and everything they touched was violently dyed in the color of flames, forming a scene that seemed like the end of the world. At first, the Death Knights who had lost their senses were still chasing the Alliance cavalry on their undead warhorses, but soon they were drowned by the explosion. The terrifying explosion plowed through the ruins of South Shore again. After a round of attacks, there was nothing left to continue standing in the flames. Ah! Perish dirty bones. Really go to hell, don't stand up again. The Rotterdam cavalry vented their frustrations from being suppressed just now. Even with the blessing of Uther's holy light, they could not fight like real paladins after all. That had nothing to do with combat skills, and was purely suppressed by the evil power of the enemy. Now they vented to their heart's content. Oh, oh, oh. The horn sounded. It was a signal for all the cavalrymen to retreat. We're still retreating? Turayan frowned. Noxus laughed. Ah, Duque is really greedy, but I like it. Ah. On the other side, Duque contacted Gina Goldsword directly through magic communication. Ms. Goldsword, how's General Dalen? Duque asked urgently. Coming. Almost in response to Dalen's confident answer, the sails of Curtila's fleet appeared in everyone's field of vision. The orcs were alarmed. Almost every orc commander realized that they were in big trouble. That's right, the coastline of South Shore was the widest, and the most suitable for a landing battle. The problem was that if they could not attack, the hundreds of thousands of orcs would all be squeezed on the narrow and long coastline. They would be the best targets for the fleet's cannons. On the flagship, seeing so many tribes squeezed on the coast, General Dalen was ecstatic. Open all the cannons and use the grape shot. I want these green-skinned creatures to go to hell. It was early in the morning and the wind was right. It was perfect for Curtila's fleet, which used sails. The sail, which was originally just a tiny dot, rapidly expanded in everyone's field of vision. There was a sudden burst of cheers that could turn the entire world upside down. Hooray! Blast those bastard green-skinned creatures to death. Don't even think about charging over. Just stay down there and take the cannons. The orcs launched a desperate charge, trying to break through the defense line of the hill. Even the ogre mages were charging, but the Dalajan mages suppressed the ogre mages very well. Chapter 264. The Alliance soldiers stood tightly on the defensive line on the hill, holding their weapons steadily. Their spears were pointed diagonally downwards and stabbed at any approaching orcs. The soldiers formed a continuous shield wall, and the trained javelin soldiers kept throwing rain of death from the higher trenches. The orcs kept attacking these squads with absolute numbers, but they could not break through the Alliance's defensive line. At this moment, the sound of cannons rang out in the distance. Duque clenched his fists in excitement. This was what he wanted. Artillery and infantry coordination. Land and sea coordination. These two concepts were completely foreign to the world of Azeroth, but to Duque, who was a transmigrator and a fan of the fake military, it was like a drizzle. The cannons of this era had very big limitations. These primitive breech-loading cannons had a short range, and their power was limited. No general or marshal would have thought of asking the fleets that entered the battlefield later to help with the cannons. To the kings of the Alliance, as long as the Alliance could withstand this wave, it would be a very impressive victory. Who would have thought that Duque's appetite was so big that he actually wanted to swallow all 100,000 orcs? And it was about to come true. In the command center, the faces of the remaining 4 kings were filled with shock and awe. Kurtirz's complete First Fleet, the half-destroyed Third Fleet, the Fourth Fleet that was chased away by Lord Howl, and the Storm Fleet took advantage of Lord Howl's fight with the Windrunner sisters to approach the shore together. Their cannons were fully opened, and a sky full of bullets poured down on the shoreline that had turned green. A series of flashes quickly flashed across the ship in the distance, followed by rising black smoke that temporarily covered the entire ship. It's here. Every Alliance soldier had an excited heart beating in their chest. When King Lang saw thousands of black lines across the morning blue sky from the top of the hill, he even forgot to continue to encourage his soldiers. Those steel beads mixed with the blazing aura of gunpowder intertwined with each other in the air. In some places, the steel beads were so densely packed that they actually collided with each other in the air, producing a series of crackling sounds. But there was no problem. It was as if God had scattered a large plate of black beans from the sky, sprinkling them on the beach with a piercing hum. Even though they knew that the next scene would be spectacular, the Stormwind soldiers and the Rotterdam soldiers on the hill were still stunned by the scene in front of them. The terrifying shellfire plowed through the orcs on the beach. The place was originally crowded with green dwarves, but after a round of fire, only a few were left standing. A sieve-like formation appeared in front of the Alliance soldiers. Just as the Alliance soldiers thought that victory was at their fingertips, a voice suddenly rang out from the battlefield. It was a sentence that was continuously shouted out. Loch Terragar, he would rather die than win. Tens of thousands of orcs recovered from their shock and shouted the same slogan. The wills of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of orcs converged into one, turning into a raging tide. Unfortunately, this tide was extinguished before it could reach the Alliance's camp. Pass my order, use the firewall technique. Duque ordered coldly. Dalaran's mages immediately released a high wall of flames on the hillside of the two Alliance mountains. Wall of Fire was not a spell with a good price-performance ratio. To maintain the Wall of Flames they had to constantly inject mana. 4 low-level mages, maintaining it for a few minutes would deplete all their mana. In most battles this spell was not very practical. However, at this crucial moment, the appearance of the firewall technique extinguished the last thoughts of the Horde. The orc warriors were not paladins who could temporarily rely on the holy light to become invincible. How much combat power could they have if they risked their lives to charge through the firewall? This attack directly smashed the morale of the Horde. Finally, the Horde's retreat horn sounded. Retreat? How could it be so easy to retreat after landing on the beach? Duque did not know who the commander of the Horde was this time, but he was sure that Orgrim was not here. However, it was not easy for the Horde to retreat. Their only path of survival was in the direction of the East Beach, because they knew that the Alliance's tight defense line was still there if they retreated to the west coast. Moreover, the sea facing the west coast was deep water. As long as Kurtirz's fleet was there, they would not be able to board the transport ship back alive. The east side was different. Even though the entire coast from South Shore to Tangarock in the southeast were guarded by Stormwind soldiers. The sea facing the east coast was shallow water with a depth of less than 3 meters. The Alliance's ships could not enter, and this was the Horde's only hope. In fact, the Horde was retreating in that direction, and the transport ship was also moving in that direction, ready to receive the Horde's warriors. However, it was not that easy. Magar, have your mare people go to the sea facing the east beach to snipe the orcs. Goo, yes, master. Without waiting for Duque's order, Lothar personally led the cavalry to chase after the orcs when they retreated. This was a rare opportunity to beat the orcs when they were down. Other than Lang, who did not dare to advance too recklessly, who continued to defend his own hill and continued to attack the Horde passing by, the bombardment had already extended to the east beach. On the hill to the west, Mograine and Abendis had already led their troops down like ferocious tigers, chasing after the Horde's tail. On the entire battlefield, the battle was nearing its end. Looking down from the sky, the silver torrent representing the Alliance was in a semi-encirclement, chasing after the remaining green parts along the coastline. The Horde had sent out many troops to cover the rear, but none of them could hold on for long. They were quickly torn apart by the fierce bombardment of the Alliance's long-range weapons and the fierce impact of the Alliance's army. They were quickly swallowed up by the human torrent. In the Alliance's command, thunderous cheers were heard. This was the first victory since the establishment of the Alliance, and it was also a rather great victory. Congratulations, Deputy Chief Marcus. The most excited king of Stormguard, Tolbane, was the first to shake hands with Duque. The Alliance's victory would undoubtedly greatly reduce the pressure on Riptide Fortress. No matter how good the defense of Sodder Bridge was, Being besieged every day was not a long-term solution. Thank you. Duque smiled. The second to come up was King Tyrrhenus. Sure enough, it's the world of the young now. Kalia misses you very much. Come to Lordaeron more often when you have time. The king of Lordaeron's words were clear. Duque forced a smile and nodded. Yes, yes, I will definitely go when I have time. Yes, I am very busy. The third was King Xion. Now it's good, at least we taught those green-skinned creatures a lesson. I don't have to worry about waking up with a bunch of green-skinned creatures on the kingdom's beach. There are still many orcs, we need to continue working hard. The last was King Eden. This Alterac king had always given Duque the impression of being gloomy, cunning, and astute. Just as Eden was about to say something, a sudden change occurred. A sharp longsword pierced through Duque's chest. Chapter 265. You should be able to hear me, right? I'm sorry, I admire your wisdom, but if you don't die, the beastmen will not be able to rule this world. A quick and clear beastman language came from behind Duque. Every word entered Duque's ears, reminding Duque of who killed him. Fireblade clan. Duke's heart was completely cut in half by the sharp blade. He coughed up blood, and blood spurted out from the gaps between his teeth that were full of blood. You really know our tribe well. It seemed to be a sigh, but it also seemed to have made up its mind. With a twist of the blade, a cold light burst forth from Duke's chest, splitting Duke's entire body into two halves. King Alterac Eden was dumbfounded. Perhaps he was very resourceful and full of ideas, but he had never been a courageous and daring king. This was something all kings looked down on. Seeing the star of the alliance who was about to shake hands with him, suddenly killed, King Eden collapsed to the ground, tears and snot flowing out of his eyes. The other three kings were also stunned. Tyrrhenus was frozen in fear, while Jean and Salas pulled out their swords at lightning speed. More than 10 sounds rang out as if they were the same note. Inside the hall were the dignitaries of various countries. Although many generals had already left the mountain, the dignitaries never lacked guards. Unfortunately, these sounds came from the chests or throats of the guards. More than 10 guards were assassinated on the spot by the sudden appearance of the orc. Among all the guards, only Windsor and Gavin Rad activated divine protection to block this fatal blow. Even though there were over 1,000 guards in attendance outside the command center at this moment in this enormous command center, there were only the 4 kings, Windsor and Gavin Rad left, a total of 6 living people. The king's pupils contracted as they finally saw their enemies. They were all tall, with ferocious faces and protruding fangs. They carried large flags with domineering words on their backs, and held 3-foot-long burning blades in their hands. They were all sword saints of the Fireblade clan. They had crossed the entire battlefield in an unimaginable way and arrived at the headquarters of the Alliance, which was overlooking the ocean. There, they had planned a decapitation strategy. I was too careless. He was too careless. The impending victory had paralyzed everyone. The soldiers could not wait to participate in the pursuit and taste the first great victory of the human alliance against the orc tribe. No one had expected the other party to be so sinister. This was worse than the last time Ryan was ambushed. If more than half of the kings of the alliance fell here, the country that lost the king would inevitably fall into chaos, and the alliance would inevitably collapse. No matter what great victory Lothar achieved on the front line, it would not help. To the tribe, these sword saints of the Fireblade clan were so close to becoming heroes. Just a little bit more. The only thing they didn't expect was that Duque would be resurrected. The surrounding air instantly dropped to the freezing point, and a tornado-like blizzard appeared in the blink of an eye. The sword saints had long since realized that something was wrong, but the snowflakes in front of them were so large that they could not even see their own fingers. It had to be said that the leading sword saint was definitely a top-notch expert. He did not hesitate for even half a second and immediately pulled out Blade Storm. The sword saints of the Fireblade clan would definitely know how to deal with this move, but it was a different matter for humans. In such a narrow space there was no space to dodge at all, and it was not just one Blade Storm but more than 10. All the sword saints used their ultimate moves at the same time as if they had a tacit understanding. Even if these sword saints were not as powerful as the leading sword saint, the Blade Storm that was blasted out was not to be underestimated. Looking at the sword light that filled their vision, even though they knew that there was a mage protecting them, all the kings were scared out of their wits. Scram! A loud roar sounded like thunder from the sky, causing everyone's eardrums to ring. The next moment, the entire ground of the command center exploded with dozens of huge ice prisms. The kings suddenly felt as if they were in the middle of a snow-colored forest. They immediately came back to their senses, and they had a question in their minds. Where were those damn sword saints of the orcs? The stone ceiling was pierced through by a large pile of ice prisms. The sword saints were also sent flying. Spin. Aren't you all very good at spinning? I'll let you guys spin around as much as you want. On the ground, Duke's figure appeared from the dissipating white fog, pointing at the sky and cursing. Yes, using one's high-speed spinning to create countless sword auras that were as sharp as blades was indeed very awesome. Don't forget, the blade storm of the sword saints came from spinning, and spinning required a fulcrum to stand on. What Duque did was to send all these fulcrum flying into the air. The sword saints were so depressed that they wanted to vomit blood. What happened to the promise of eating the king's heads together tonight? What happened to the promise of using their ultimate moves to destroy the heavens, the earth, and the air? The legendary ultimate move that would definitely cause a bloodbath had all become a fool's one-man show. It was not that they did not want to stop, but this kind of terrifying ultimate move that erupted all of their energy in an instant was not something that could be stopped easily. They also wanted to move away from the ice prisms under their feet and then slash at Duque. But the ice prisms under their feet continued to thicken and extend, not letting them fall. As a result, under the gaze of thousands of Alliance soldiers, the roof of the Alliance's headquarters was lifted off, and then more than a dozen small tornadoes of sword blades spun continuously in the air. It was not known whether this scene was terrifying or funny. This situation directly alarmed many soldiers who were chasing at the front lines. Not good. Every general's face was pale. Stop. Everyone return. Turayan shouted nervously. Wait. Noxus stopped Turayan's recklessness. What can we do if we go back now? Duque should be fine. If he's here. Almost at the same time, the mages responsible for communications around every general received a message from Duque. All the important personnel are fine. The headquarters is under attack. Crisis. Kel, Thuzad is back. Duque was very calm and very clear-headed. If he called for the cavalry to return now, they would definitely not make it in time. But the two pharaohs were another matter. A series of flash lights lit up on both sides of the mountain. There was no time to lock onto the coordinates of the teleportation, so the two famous pharaohs of the future used the fastest and most violent method, using flash continuously to hurry on their way. Low-ranked mages had to rest and adjust their magic circuits after each use of flash, but there were no such restrictions for Radiant Moon mages. While others could travel 20 yards with a blink, these two fellows could travel 200 yards with a single blink. Moreover, they didn't even need to pause. They were practically burning with anxiety. Originally, Duque had planned to hold out until the two of them returned, but Duque suddenly found an opportunity. Chapter 266. The system elf spoke, which was rare. Dear host, do you want to eat them alone? I've scanned them and found that they seem to have skill books that you can use. The system elf was connected to Duque's brain, and this kind of brainwave communication took almost no time. Skill book? Why would a mage like me need a Blade Master's skill book? I'm tired of carrying such a big kitchen knife. I don't know, but their energy fluctuations are similar to yours. If you can kill them alone, you might be able to extract the skill book from the energy in their bodies. Wow, that's possible? At this moment, Duque was excited. Duque yelled loudly. What skills did a Blade Master have? There were so many Blade Master's skills. But the core of a Blade Master were still those 4 skills. Gale's Step could make a Blade Master invisible and increase his movement speed. If a Blade Master attacked a target while invisible, it would cause additional damage and reveal himself. This was much more powerful than a thief's invisibility. Mirror Image could create an illusion of a Blade Master to confuse the opponent and eliminate all unfavorable magic effects. Critical Strike could increase the probability of a Blade Master dealing more damage when attacking. Needless to say, Blade Storm, the rapidly rotating blades could easily injure all enemy ground troops in the vicinity, and also made the Sword Saint immune to magic. Any one of these 4 skills could bring great help to Duque. For a moment, great ambition surged into Duque's heart. Fight tycoons. Distribute land. Oh no, it should be, fight the boss. Rob his mother. At this moment, Duque's mind was unprecedentedly focused, completely from the greed in his heart, from the desire for power, and from the anger of being killed. It was a very magical and very strange slight distortion of the mind. He didn't even notice that a few things flashed in the system notification. Detected, greed, in the 7 major sins, activated. You have developed a strong greed for something. Due to your human nature, exploding state. Greed, changed from a negative soul state to a positive soul state. Transforming in progress. You have obtained temporary special abilities, plunder, and luck. Plunder. You can obtain more spoils of war from the enemies you kill. Note, this can be beyond the concept of physics. Luck. Even living enemies can become your luck. Because they are your potential for advancement. When luck is activated, you will get a higher chance of critical hits and better item drops. Duque didn't notice, he really didn't notice. He only knew that his magic had been activated. Just as the Blade Masters ended their Blade Storm, the Blade Masters were activated. A large amount of water elemental energy rushed into Duke's ice barrier, and with the help of Rapid Avalanche, the place where the Sword Saints were standing was turned into a giant ice ball that was held up by dozens of ice pillars. A translucent ice film sealed off all entrances and exits. Inside, the temperature was dropping rapidly. At the same time, a huge clockwise snowstorm swept up everything inside. The Sword Saints were so depressed that they vomited blood. Of all times, the enemy had unleashed it. That unreasonable ice tornado did not seem like something a sky wizard could do. It was a morning star, no, a radiant moon. They weren't strong in terms of freezing air. The problem was that Duque had placed a large number of palm-sized round ice flakes in the barrier. In terms of freezing air, it was not considered strong, but the problem was that Dooku had placed a large number of palm-sized round ice shards inside the barrier, and under the sweeping of the ice storm, these ice shards all became the most lethal blades, crazily cutting their bodies. Under normal circumstances, the Blade Masters could have used all sorts of methods to avoid the attack before the spell was formed. However, Duque just had to wait for them to finish casting their ultimate spells. If it were any other enemy, they could have used Gale Steps to escape. But where could they run to now? Because they were weak, they were sucked into the ice storm and lost control of their own bodies. A Sword Saint was definitely an elite among the Beastmen. Compared to other Beastmen, a Sword Saint's attack power, speed, and agility were all maximized. Chopping down trees and boulders would only require one slash. In comparison, their defense and vitality were at the level of an ordinary human. After casting their ultimate spells, the Blade Master was even weaker than an ordinary human. The ice blades continuously created wounds on their bodies. Very soon, the first Blade Master lost his life. The second, the third, the leading Blade Master's eyes were bloodshot, and he let out a ferocious roar. Loktar Ogre? Even though he was weak, even though his arms were sore and limp, even though every time he swung his blade he still attacked. Relying on his physique that was stronger than the other Sword Saints, he suddenly stepped on a piece of ice that was already floating in the air. Using the seemingly insignificant reaction force, he shot out of the ice shield's range like a falling meteor. Only you must die. There were countless bloodstains on the Blade Master's face. The wounds caused by the sharp ice blades were already covered with frost. Before he broke through the barrier, the ice blades cut his face again and again. The wounds on his chest were already disorderly, like a piece of rotten meat that was about to be chopped up. There was only a small section of the red flag left on his back. Only the long blade was still astonishingly bright. Only the remaining blood-red eye was surging with endless fighting spirit. Duque raised his head and calmly stared at the Blade Master, who risked his life to launch a fatal attack on him. Duque suddenly admired him. Not everyone had the courage to enter the enemy's rear and kill the enemy's leader. Not everyone had the courage to launch a suicidal charge against the enemy when there was still a chance to escape. If he had chosen to escape, perhaps Duque might not have been able to catch him. But after seeing his brother die in battle, he chose to die together with Duque. He was a hero. Unfortunately, the enemy's hero was my enemy's enemy. Flames were not fatal to the Fireblade clan. Duque's ice circuit had been used up in the huge ice storm, so the only thing left was arcane spells. No longer caring about hiding, the 108 hands of magic formed a huge cloister. One end was the Blade Master leader, and the other end was Duque. If he wanted to kill his way to Duque, he had to use the arcane blast from these hands of magic. The dense barrage completely exceeded the limits of what the Blade Master leader could withstand. In less than a tenth of a second, the Blade Master leader was turned into a sieve and fell heavily. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.